coast to coast, tonight, Canadians rejected division and negativity. They rejected cuts and austerity, and they voted in favor of a progressive agenda and strong action on climate change. Regardless of how you cast your ballot, ours is a team that will fight for all Canadians. And to Canadians in Alberta and Saskatchewan, know that you are an essential part of our great country. I've heard your frustration, and I want to be there to support you. Let us all work hard to bring our country together. In the years ahead, our team will work hard to build on the progress made by the Canadians who came before us. We will champion Canada in all its diversity. We will give voice to the voiceless. And in every decision we make as your government, we will always put this country and its people first.
Well, you're watching NP Live. Thanks for joining us. I'm Larissa Harrapin. It's the day after the vote. Joining us in studio with their perspective is Van Melissa Moranium, Christy Blatchford, and Andrew Coyne. Andrew, I want to start with you first. First order of business for the Prime Minister.
A little humility, I think, would be maybe the first order of business, at least on the night. That was a remarkable speech. You'd think he'd won another majority. You'd never know that he'd lost more than 1 million votes, finished behind his nearest competitor in the vote, and got the weakest mandate of any winning government, winning party in the history of the country. He's right to say that this was a vote for a progressive agenda if you add together all the other parties. And that's where we're going to be at now, is he's going to have to govern with other parties. He's going to have to make compromises with them. Maybe not huge compromises, because everybody's emerging kind of weakened from this, maybe except the Bloc. But nevertheless, he's in a very different world than he has inhabited for the last 4 years, and I'm not sure he yet knows it.
Christy, your take. Can the Trudeau government work with other parties?
Oh, I'm sure. I mean, their principles are, if nothing else, elastic. So I see no difficulty with them working with any of the others, frankly. Good grief. Do they have principles? Not that I've been able to spot. And I agree with Andrew. I thought that was a very bizarre speech. It was as though nothing had changed in the world. You know, hi, I'm back. I'm sincere. Oh.
A victory speech, right?
I mean, it was interesting that he kind of made this out to be a victory speech when really the Liberals lost about 28 to 30 of their seats from the last time. I also found it interesting that even Scheer and Jagmeet Singh, I know you haven't shown those clips yet, but they made it out to be victory speeches as well. So when you watched all those speeches, it appeared to be that all the leaders had won, which I think was confusing given that the only real winner of the night was actually the Bloc, having gained about 22 seats out in Quebec. So, it's going to be interesting. And on your point on, how Trudeau's going to work with the parties, I think he will, but it will be difficult given that the NDP and the Bloc and the Greens have 3 seats, have said that they're not going to budge on any kind of pipeline issue. And so I think that will be the kind of the issue in which they'll all come up against each other. So we'll see how it turns out. But
and we'll unpack that in just a little bit later on. Go ahead, Andrew.
Just a particularly telling note that they all spoke at the same time. Maybe that was accidental. I kind of doubt it. I think there's maybe some residual bitterness from this campaign. It was a bitter campaign. It was a petty campaign on many occasions on all sides. And they may well have emerged out of this with not a lot of goodwill towards each other. But as Christy said, when power's on the line, not just the Liberals, everybody gets a bit elastic.
Weighing in with his perspective is John Ivison. John Ivison, of course, was with the Trudeau camp. Let's hear what he had to say.
This is not a night to celebrate for the Liberals. They're lucky they're here at all, I think. Justin Trudeau returns as in a strong minority position, but I think it is a damaged position. Any more victories like this and the Liberal Party will be sunk. They lost 30 MPs, a couple of cabinet ministers, big losses right across the country. kicked out of Alberta and Saskatchewan entirely. Large swathes of British Columbia rejected them too. He was seen as being infallible and unbeatable almost when he was first elected. That was why the big beasts of the Conservative Party didn't run for their leadership. He now looks very fallible, and I think that if Andrew Scheer is replaced as leader, which I think is eminently possible, there will be a rush of candidates to try and get that job, because I think they will see a vulnerable Justin Trudeau who may decide not even to run for the next 4 years. He may retire gracefully early before being defeated, because I think this government is wounded and its opponents know that.
Andrew, you mentioned in your most recent column that this was the PC chance to shine. There was a wounded Justin Trudeau. The left was divided. Could there be calls for Andrew Scheer's resignation at this point?
I would not doubt it. I know some people saying, look, give him a chance, he only ran one campaign, but it was not impressive. This was a winnable campaign. Surprisingly, I mean, when unemployment is at 5.5%, traditionally you expect that's good news for the government. They're going to be unbeatable. And it certainly gave them a lift, but there's no doubt there was a lot of disaffection from with the government, but mostly that was manifesting itself as a split amongst the left. The problem the Conservatives have, and it's not just about the leadership, is that they have this very solid base of 30 to 35% that will never go, that will never desert them, but they can't get anywhere beyond that, and they don't seem disposed to try. And so they ran this very strange campaign, for which the leader has to bear responsibility, that was very small ball, had very little new. It was retreading of old, failed, frankly, Harper-era policies, children's fitness tax credits, this kind of thing, rather than presenting any kind of more appealing vision of change in the country. And the salesman for that not very appetizing product looked tremulous and weak and dissembling at many times. It was just not an impressive figure. So I agree with John. I think the knives will be out, and if they're going to do it, they should do it quickly.
Christy,
I agree.
In his speech, in Andrew Scheer's speech, he said, "We're the government in waiting."
Well, I guess they are, but it will require a lot more than just waiting. And I think he's going to see some challenges to his leadership. I think he should. It was a very disappointing campaign and a performance by him, particularly when he wouldn't answer at all. Point blank refused to answer the questions about whether the Conservatives had hired Warren Kinsella and Daisy Group to do a takeout job on Max Bernier, who self-immolated anyway, really. But I mean, that is a case where the privilege, which we all talked about so much with SNC, the privilege belongs squarely with the client in a relationship like that, and that means it was up to Mr. Scheer to disclose it. Mm-hmm. And I found it discombobulating to see the Conservative leader act exactly as Trudeau acted on SNC. Very disappointing, and so I think he needs to get a little push out the door himself.
But forgive me, I mean, that was just one incident. When you take a look at the Prime Minister, I mean, there were scandals upon scandals, criminal and possibility of criminal indictments. So, we're Canadians a little more forgiving when it came to Justin Trudeau, and maybe not as much with Scheer.
Yes, of course.
But if you're the opposition, I guess this is part of the problem. The Tories thought that old line about governments defeating themselves. They thought that all they had to do is just sort of push and call them a few names, and everyone would reject it. But I think, particularly with something like SNC Lab, when people have been so burned so often, we've had so many governments coming in saying we're going to clean up the mess that the previous government left, and then they leave their own mess, that you've got to show them why you do anything differently. And he didn't manage to either convey, either in policy terms, I mean, there was a couple of things, but more importantly in his own persona, that he had the gravitas and the judgment and the character that he would not go down that same road.
But I'm going to stop you there for a minute. Vanmala, I want to bring you in. They won the popular vote.
Yeah, they did. So they won the popular vote by a little margin over about 1% or 1.5% over the Liberals, and that was interesting. But one of the things, I think it was in your panel, Andrew, last night that was talked about was why didn't the Conservatives campaign with Doug Ford in the GTA, and whether perhaps if they had kind of brought Ford on, would that have made a difference in the campaign? I'm not sure about that, but it was, if you take a look at the map of the GTA, obviously the Conservatives, their support, they really kind of lost out in those vote-rich ridings that would have really kind of made kind of increase their voter base. So I think that's something interesting. The other interesting thing is Lisa Raitt lost in Milton, and if you talk about who is gonna, if Andrew Scheer gets voted out of the party and it's not party leader next year, who's going to take his place? Peter MacKay has said no, if I'm not mistaken. Lisa Raitt is out now. If I'm not aware of anyone young and vibrant within the Conservative movement, maybe there's someone out there, but it seems to be that, Scheer is all right now, for the lack of a better alternative, I would say.
I think Peter MacKay's no may be a diplomatic no.
All right.
It may not be.
Okay.
You're right. It may not be a permanent no.
Yes.
He may. If people twist his arm enough, he may come back.
Yeah.
But they need others. I mean, that's if you're banking your future on Peter MacKay, I think you're in a lot of trouble.
We did see him on stage a couple of times backing Scheer. So he was along the campaign trail.
He had better, because his people were out there talking to newspapers and talking about how they were organizing for him. So
that's right.
It didn't look good on him. But there's other, there's Ronna Ambrose, possibly Jason Kenney, maybe not at this juncture, but at some point I wouldn't be surprised to see him come back. Brad Wall, former Premier of Saskatchewan. There are people out there who would command following. I'm not saying any of them are the right choice, but there is a potential race to be had, but the party has to figure that out. But again, I want to say, it's not just about the leader, it's about what is this party about? And this is, to some extent, a historic problem for Conservatives in Canada. They have got into themselves this idea that everybody's against us, that we can never win by just telling people what we think and what we believe. So they always have to play these cat and mouse games. They need to both be more confident and have reason to be more confident. They need to have policies that are relevant to the problems of today. They need to be not ashamed to tell people what those policies are, and they have to take the scowl off their face. Lisa Raitt, I'm not saying she'd be the right choice, but certainly that appealing public persona, that ability to present
and speak on her feet.
Yeah, and present a face where people can say, I get that person, I know what she's about, I can understand what her values are. They need much more of that.
But it was interesting last night, Lisa Raitt, when she was interviewed by the CBC, seemed to be kind of shocked that she lost. At least I interpreted it. She looked like she was crying. She said they need to kind of regroup, take a step back, and figure out kind of what went wrong here. So that was interesting to me, because I knew that it was going to be a tight race, but I think she thought she was going to win. And I think that speaks to how the demographics of Milton has changed. So Milton has seen an influx of younger voters coming in, a more diverse population. I'm not sure yet whether that affected Lisa Raitt, but I think the party as a whole needs to take a look at these other, voter bases out there to see how can we get them on board.
But again,
there's also the terrifying prospect that there is no there with the Conservatives. I mean, you shouldn't have to muster up a vision of what you want Canada to look like. It should be in your heart, you know. You should be able to say, this is what, immigration is a prime example. I mean, bring more people here is always my view on that, no matter how they come here.
And I think there is good news in this, both good news and bad news, in the demise of the People's Party, which I think was never much more than a vanity project, unfortunately, but it also tried to tap into sometimes legitimate complaints with the way the country's government, also tapped into some pretty dark impulses as well. And it's good news that failed. It's bad news, in my personal opinion, because I think there was room for another Conservative Party. People on the right are so afraid of splitting the vote. But the left has been splitting the vote since 1935, during which time the Liberals have won 3 out of 4 elections. My contention is, you have two parties, it doesn't just split the vote, it expands the base of the vote. So I've never been opposed to the idea of an NDP of the right, but I think the People's Party is not it, and it's probably going to fold its tent.
I want to go back to something that Van Mille mentioned in terms of that party perhaps needs to recalibrate. Something that struck me about what Andrew Scheer said last night in his speech, right off the bat, he said, our party is united. It just felt like, why would he have to reaffirm that? He did win in his riding in Regina last night, and let's take a listen to what he had to say.
Now, first and foremost, I want to thank the voters of Regina Qu'Appelle for once again electing me as your member of parliament. And to everybody across the country who joined our Conservative team over the last 40 days, whether you knocked on doors, put in lawn signs, made a donation, or simply told your friend and neighbor why you were voting Conservative, our party is strong. It is united, and we are on the march, ladies and gentlemen. We ran an excellent campaign from top to bottom. For that, we should all be proud. Now, I have just spoken with Prime Minister Trudeau to congratulate him on winning the most seats. And my message tonight is that the strength of our democracy is not only measured by the ballots we cast, but also by how we move forward after they're counted. And while tonight's result isn't what we wanted, I am also incredibly proud. Proud of our team, proud of our campaign, and proud of the bigger and stronger Conservative team that we will send to Ottawa. Now, there are still a number of really close races, so we don't know for sure how many more Conservatives Canadians will send to Ottawa tonight. But what we do know is that after the 2015 election, when Justin Trudeau looked unstoppable, when all the pundits and experts said it was the beginning of another Trudeau dynasty, that he would have 8 or even 12 years in power. But tonight, Conservatives have put Justin Trudeau on notice. And Mr. Trudeau, when your government falls, Conservatives will be ready and we will win.
Minority governments typically last, and you probably know this better than I do, somewhere between 13 and 15 months. What's going to trigger that next election?
If you had to guess right now, it would be the Liberals would find some way to trigger it themselves. I don't think the NDP wants an election anytime soon. Their funds are depleted. They've got some leadership questions as well, I think. I mean, people are talking about how Jagmeet Singh did so well in this campaign, and he did measured against where he started, which was ground zero. But they basically did worse than they did in the 2015 election. So there'll be some questions, I think, on the NDP, but certainly I don't think they want to have an election anytime soon. So I guess one possible candidate is SNC-Lavalin. And I know people sometimes think, oh, that story is all dead and buried. But this election began with a story about, that I'm sure was credibly sourced, about RCMP inquiry/investigation where they couldn't get witnesses to talk to them because the Prime Minister would not release them from cabinet confidentiality. I suspect we're going to hear more about that story. I suspect we'll see. There'll be some interesting toing and froing in the opposition benches because there'll be some opposition parties that certainly want to hear more about this. The government no longer controls the committees. The question, I guess, is the Bloc at this point doesn't look like they want to cooperate on this. But I don't think this story is necessarily going to go away. And if we find ourselves in the middle of an RCMP investigation, depending on where that goes, that could change the landscape in a hurry.
10 seats for Scheer in Quebec. What moved the needle for him there? What do you think?
I don't think it did.
Yeah.
He's not for lack of trying. He threw every pander at them, as Tory candidates have done from time immemorial, of saying, you know, you get to collect the federal income tax. We'll give you even more powers over immigration. We'll look the other way at this appalling Bill 21. And as usual, it was rewarded with complete indifference. So it didn't, they had hopes, but.
That's one of the disgraces, I think, of this whole campaign was that nobody spoke in defense of Canadians who wear religious symbols or, Jews, Muslims, whatever, Sikhs. They can't be members of certain parts of the public service in Quebec. And, Trudeau finally said, well, I'm not going to intervene now, but I might at some point. Fat chance.
And took the others to task for not saying, I might do something.
Yeah, but how is that possible? It is a plainly, on its face, racist bill. It's a disgrace.
Absolutely. I actually think Quebec is really interesting because something is going on there. I'm not the right person to kind of speculate on what it is, but the provincial elections, we saw them vote for, I guess, would you call that a separatist party? The CAQ, kind of.
A nationalist party.
A nationalist party. And so there's something going on in Quebec in the last 4 to 5 years where they're just kind of getting behind Quebec nationalism and getting, into themselves and saying, this is our province. They're getting a little bit more defensive, and I think that reflected in the vote last night. I don't think the Conservative 10 seats were very significant just because they've probably always had those seats. They're always going to be a base of voters who are going to vote for some party, and those were the the NDP is decimated in Quebec. They're done. Like if you look at the map from 2011, 8 years later, the orange wave is practically gone. And so I think the post-election analysis, a lot of it for me, what I want to know is what really happened in Quebec and why did the Bloc, what is behind the resurgence of the Bloc? Is it perhaps something to do with, Bill 21, Jagmeet Singh being a person of color, running as a party leader? I think that needs to be dissected a little bit.
Let's unpack that third party spot in a moment. But first off, let's take a listen to Chris Selly, who was with Andrew Scheer and his camp in Regina.
Good morning from Regina, where a few hours ago Andrew Scheer tried to put a brave face on an undeniably disappointing result. He had told supporters over and over that the Conservatives were on the cusp of a big win, a majority government, but instead the Liberals have a strong minority, and if the NDP are willing to support them, officially or unofficially, a de facto majority. That's exactly what Scheer warned Canadians would be the worst possible outcome. Scheer likened the result to 2004 when Stephen Harper fell short of expectations, but then 2 years later won an election and began nearly a decade in power, beginning with minority governments. And if Scheer is going to stay on as leader, he'll have to hope supporters buy that. If I were a Conservative supporter, though I'm not sure I would, 2004 was the reunited Conservative Party's first election. Monday's was its sixth. It's going to be much harder for Scheer to keep discontented voices quiet than it was for Harper. Speaking of discontented voices, judging by the applause at the International Trade Centre here in Regina, I think just about all non-Liberal Canadians can unite in appreciating Jody Wilson-Raybould's victory in Vancouver-Granville. Some justice there for the former Minister of Justice and a richly deserved thumb in Justin Trudeau's eye, as were Monday's results overall.
What does an independent do in Parliament? Any one of you?
I defer to you. Will you watch it close up?
Not a lot, unfortunately, usually. We all wish that independents had more. I wish that people within parties had more independence. I think there is value in parties in terms of giving people a coherent sense of what does this group stand for, and then you allow people to differ on different policies at the margins. But if you're there without a party, traditionally you don't have a lot of clout. You're not going to be in line for, certainly for cabinet or for committee posts. She's going to have to fight to get every chance she can speak. Even Elizabeth May, when she was a one-person party, was up against all kinds of frankly, discrimination in favor of the larger parties. She may well, I wonder whether she will find a way to kind of affiliate herself and yet not be part of the party, probably with the Liberals, but we'll see.
I think for Jody Wilson-Raybould, being there itself is interesting, just because if the SNC Lavalin thing gets opened up and there's an RCMP investigation, the fact that she's sitting right there and is a member of Parliament is going to be, symbolic. So I think for her, it's more of a symbolic victory, not so much speaking towards the potential rise of independence and how well independents can fare in the system, because I don't think they really can. Hers was a specific, special case, and actually Jane Philpott lost, and she lost, she wasn't close, she was in third place. So I think that vote for Jody Wilson was just a vote for her. It wasn't really a vote for an independent candidate.
And I was very sad to see Jane Philpott lose. Her position was even more of a position of principle than Jody Wilson-Raybould. It was entirely, she had no personal involvement in it other than she thought this was wrong. And she stepped down from a significant cabinet post, and more significantly than that, she was in line for bigger things to come. She was clearly the most competent minister in that government. Absolutely. She had a decent shot at becoming the first woman finance minister. And I feel badly for her. It's an unfortunate lesson in the realities of politics.
I want to talk about that third spot, the Bloc Québécois and Yves-François Blanchet. You mentioned something right off the top, pipelines. Is the Bloc going to be an asset or a hindrance to Parliament?
I think that is too early to tell. I think that there are a couple of issues that the Liberals and the Bloc can, unite on, but I think the environmental issue is one that they can't. So it depends how early on in the next governing cycle, the Liberals kind of want to really bring up what they're going to do about Trans Mountain, because that's where I think they're all going to butt heads. But I think Andrew would know better.
One thing I'll say, yeah, I agree, Andrew will know better, as will you. I prefer murderers and rapists, which is the kind of beat I normally cover, so to politicians, and I have far more expertise there. But the one thing about the Bloc being in Parliament in such numbers is that at least they are honest. You know that they are only in it for what Quebec can get. Quebec wants this, Quebec will get it. The other leaders, as we've seen in the campaign, pretend that that's what they're not doing, but it's what they're doing too. And, it's irritating, frankly. How stupid do they think we are?
They didn't have party status. Now what?
Before, I mean,
Yeah.
when they had only 4 seats. Yeah, no, they're it's sad to see. They're not a particularly positive presence if you're in favor of the continuing existence of Canada. They are under some constraint in that Quebecers don't want them to be a wrecking ball. They don't want them to be obstructionists. They don't want them to just make things not work. They want them to, as Christy is saying, defend Quebec's interests first. So it's a double-edged sword. They are under some constraint not to behave badly, not just to try and wreck things, but they will always and everywhere be putting the narrow, parochial interest above the Canadian national interest, and it's yet another thing for other parties to navigate.
I wonder if the Bloc could be a good, kind of a useful tool for the Liberals. So in the sense that when they need them to ally with the Liberals on certain policies or certain bills that they need to pass, the Bloc is there now. I'm asking a question, but I wonder what you would think.
It depends on the
about
issue.
that.
Yeah, I mean, you can conceive of it. It's also a foil. I mean, Trudeau always wants to run on national unity, and having this ominous force out there and they tried lamely towards the end of the campaign to sort of run against the Bloc. Again, these things can go both ways. I'm not sure that they can really do anything at this point to stop TMX. I may be wrong, but I think as far as Parliament is concerned, I think that's a done deal. They just need to get the thing built.
I'm curious, how real is this? I'm sure you've heard these analogies and you've seen the hashtag Wexit. How real is this alienation of Western Canada? How real is the Bloc Québécois, and is it nationalism or sovereignty? Is this what's going on in our country now?
Well, nationalism, sovereignty, it's like the one candidate who said, I'm not a separatist, but I'm a sovereignist. It's all how many angels can dance on the head of a pin. So that's less interesting. I think the alienation in Western Canada is real. I remember the last time I was in Calgary, the downtown office vacancy rate was 50%. Now it's about 35%. There's a whole young generation of really skilled work people who can't get jobs. There are no jobs. It's real. And, for all the attention that the Prime Minister paid to Alberta, both before and after, and now saying, we'll be there for you too. Oh, please. They're not going to buy that. He's going to have to show.
There's definite alienation. I don't think there's any serious threat of a separatist movement in Western Canada, but there's definitely alienation there. It's definitely something that's going to be toxic for us. I'm not saying it's not justified. I sympathize with a lot of their concerns, but it's going to be another element in this toxic mix that we've got with alienation in Quebec and alienation in the West. The West has a sort of bloc Westois in the form of the Conservative Party. With the difference that the Conservatives have shown, at least in the odd election, that they can win power and can actually represent Western interests, but they've got to balance them against trying to win support in the rest of the country as well. So it's not quite the same. But they definitely have an advocate in Ottawa. The Conservative Party has owned the West since the 1950s. It's the most remarkable block of vote that we've seen in Canadian political history, and it shows no sign of stopping.
We're slowly, forgive me, we're running out of time here, but I want to get your take really quickly on a few other elements. Who needs to recalibrate here? What happens with Bernier now? I mean, there are no people in the People's Party. Who goes on? How does he go on? What happens with Elizabeth May? What happens with Jagmeet Singh?
Elizabeth May has said that this is going to be her last term and she's done after that. So I think she's had a really good run, and the Greens did well. They won an interesting seat seat out in Fredericton in New Brunswick. They have 3 seats. So that's, I think Jagmeet Singh needs to really, the NDP needs to recalibrate, because, you know, they lost 15 seats. They might be kind of painting this out as a victory, but, you know, just sheerly on statistics, 4% less of the popular vote than they got last time, and 15 seats less. So I think they need to think about what they're going to do next.
And weren't the Greens courting Jody Wilson-Raybould?
They were.
Yes, they were.
Elizabeth
Yeah.
May offered to step down in,
Yep.
in her favor. Yeah, I mean, the Greens did double their vote. They didn't win as many seats as they hoped. All these things, you have to measure them against expectations, right? They came in with all the wind behind them and then had, frankly, not a very good campaign at all. But they are, with 6% of the vote, that's a historic high for them, and it's something that the next leader, if she does choose to step down, can build on. So she can go out on a relative high. I agree that Jagmeet Singh, you know, may be safe for the next little while, but I think if they go down the polls, I think people are going to remember why they were discontented in before this election campaign. And as for Bernier, I think he showed no signs of it on election night. But you know, this thing was never grounded. If there'd been a group of people who'd left the Conservative Party with him, people of prominence in the party who'd left with him, that's traditionally how these things start up. It's not just one guy says, I'm starting a party, and it'll be the Max Bernier party, and its platform will be whatever I say its platform is. And he just did not do very well at all.
Just before I give all of you the final word, electoral reform.
This election is a standard advertisement for it. The party with the party won with fewer seats, fewer votes than the party that it defeated, but got 30 more seats. The Bloc got slightly more votes than the Greens, but got 10 times as many seats. You've got Liberals in the West who are unrepresented. You got Tories in Atlantic Canada and Quebec, who are, you know, it's vastly underrepresented. And the terrible aspect of this is, as divided as this country is, and there are serious divisions in the country, this makes it worse. It makes it even starker. It exaggerates it and gives, you know, if the Liberals are going to listen to people in the West, it helps if they have some people elected from the West, and our system discourages that.
Christy.
I agree completely. I think this is as stark an example of the system being flawed as we've seen, and it's just so nakedly unfair, you know, that people at West have such, you know, such minimal representation. Quebec and Ontario are so rich. BC's rich. I don't know, it makes me nuts. So yes, I'm in favor of your long-held position that it's time for a change.
Vanmela, final word to you.
I think, I mean, I agree with Andrew and Christy on electoral reform. It needs to happen in some shape or form. But I think one thing that any governing party needs to be aware of is don't ignore the alienation. And in this case, it's the alienation out west, because we saw in the US example and in many countries in Europe, that is alienation breeds something else. And so, we, you know, yes, the People's Party got wiped out, but if we continue to ignore the concerns of young people, especially who are out of jobs, who feel that they absolutely have no hope, that could come back and bite, you know, the governing party at some point in the future. So I would say, you know, we need to not ignore it.
Well, a big thank you to all of you for your insight, your perspective, your time. Thank you kindly. And of course, thank you to all of you for watching. For more, just go to our website, thenationalpost.com. Thank you.